Welcome to my channel, Rise Up with Steve. Please hit like, subscribe, and don't forget to share with your friends.
Let me tell you something most women don't realize, but every man understands deep down. When you block a man, you think you're taking your power back. You think you're teaching him a lesson. You think he's sitting there stressed, confused, panicking, losing sleep over you. But that's not what really happens. Blocking gives him closure, and closure is comfort. Men don't hurt the most when they can't reach you. They hurt the most when they can reach you, but they don't get the reaction they expected. See, a man's ego is tied to access. As long as he believes he can still get to you. A text, a call, a reaction, an argument, even anger, he feels in control. Blocking him shuts the door completely, and once the door is shut, his mind stops working overtime. He accepts it faster than you think. But when you don't block him, when you simply go quiet, when you stay calm, when you stop feeding the emotional loop, now his mind has space to wander. Now he starts asking questions. Let me tell you something most women don't hear often enough, but every man understands on a deep, instinctive level. When emotions run high and things fall apart, the first reaction is to block him. Cut him off, remove him everywhere. You think that action shows strength. You think it shows boundaries. You think it will hurt him the most. But in reality, blocking a man rarely causes the kind of pain you imagine. Most of the time, it actually makes things easier for him. Men are wired to deal with clear endings. When you block him, you give him a final line under the story. He doesn't have to wonder anymore. He doesn't have to reflect deeply. He can tell himself the situation is finished and move forward without fully processing what he lost. Blocking feels powerful in the moment, but what it really does is relieve him of emotional responsibility. What hurts a man far more is access without connection. When he can still see you, still reach out, still feel that door is technically open, but emotionally locked. That's when his mind starts working against him. Silence without hostility creates tension. Calm without explanation creates discomfort. He starts replaying conversations in his head. He starts questioning his behavior. He starts wondering why you're no longer reacting the way you used to. A man expects emotion. He expects anger, tears, accusations, long messages, late-night calls. Even negative attention feeds his ego because it tells him he still matters. When you remove that reaction, when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop trying to be understood, something shifts. He loses his reference point. He doesn't know where he stands anymore, and that uncertainty is deeply unsettling. Blocking is loud. Silence is quiet but heavy. Loud actions feel dramatic, but they fade quickly. Quiet actions linger. When you don't block him and you simply go on with your life, focused, composed, emotionally unavailable, he feels the absence in a stronger way. Not because you vanished, but because you changed. The version of you that once responded instantly, cared deeply, and tried endlessly is gone. Men process loss through distance and time. If you remove yourself completely and force distance instantly, you shorten that process. But if you remain visible while emotionally detached, the loss stretches. He sees you living. He senses your peace. He notices you're no longer centered around him. That contrast creates regret far more effectively than any argument ever could. This isn't about manipulation. It's about self-respect. A woman who doesn't block impulsively shows control. Control over her emotions, her reactions, her energy. That control signals maturity and strength. And strength is something men respect even when they don't admit it out loud. When you block him, you're still reacting to him. Your decision is still centered on his actions. But when you don't block him and instead redirect your focus inward, you reclaim your power quietly. You're no longer trying to teach him a lesson. You're teaching yourself a standard. A man feels pain when he realizes he no longer has influence over your emotional state. When his messages don't trigger excitement or anger. When his absence doesn't cause panic. When his presence doesn't disturb your peace. That realization hits slowly, but it hits deep. The truth is, blocking feels like strength because it's immediate. But true strength is restraint. It's choosing not to react when you're hurt. It's choosing dignity over drama. It's allowing someone to feel the weight of your absence without you announcing it. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop demanding clarity, and stop reacting, the loss becomes real, not dramatic, not explosive. Real, and real loss sits with a man far longer than anger ever will. There comes a moment when a woman realizes that reacting has only been draining her, not empowering her. In that moment, the urge to block him feels natural. It feels like the fastest way to regain control, to stop the emotional bleeding, to prove a point. But what most people don't understand is that control doesn't come from cutting someone off loudly. It comes from no longer needing to respond at all. Blocking may feel like an ending, but in many cases, it actually prevents the other person from feeling the full weight of what they've lost. Men are not affected the same way women are by sudden emotional severance. When a man is blocked, his mind tends to simplify the situation. He labels it as finished. He tells himself the chapter is closed and gives himself permission to detach without much internal struggle. That clean break allows him to avoid sitting with guilt, regret, or accountability. He may feel a brief sting, but it fades quickly because the situation feels resolved. What truly unsettles a man is emotional distance without hostility. When communication is technically possible but emotionally unavailable, his mind has no place to settle. He doesn't get the release of an argument or the certainty of rejection. He is left alone with questions. He starts replaying moments, tone words, and decisions. Silence without explanation becomes louder than any confrontation. A man expects reaction. He expects emotion. Even anger reassures him that he still has a place in your emotional world. When that reaction disappears, it creates a void. And humans struggle with voids. He wonders why you're no longer responding the same way, why your energy has shifted, why the dynamic feels unfamiliar. That uncertainty attacks his sense of control and challenges his self-image. Remaining unblocked is not about availability, it's about indifference. There is a powerful difference between being accessible and being affected. You can be reachable and still unreachable emotionally. That separation is what creates discomfort. He can see you moving forward without him, existing without emotional chaos, and that contrast forces him to confront his own role in losing you. Men often process loss visually and over time. Seeing you calm, stable, and focused without seeking his validation creates a delayed reaction. At first, he may assume you'll come back, that the silence is temporary. But as time passes and nothing changes, the realization settles in. He understands that you didn't disappear to punish him. You simply stopped needing him. This approach isn't about playing games or trying to provoke regret. It's about preserving your dignity. Emotional restraint communicates self-worth far more clearly than dramatic exits ever could. When you stop over-explaining and over-reacting, you're not withholding love, you're protecting your peace. Blocking someone is still a response. It still centers them in your decision-making. Choosing not to react at all shifts the focus back to yourself. Your energy is no longer invested in managing his feelings or teaching him a lesson. That internal shift is what creates real power. A man feels the deepest loss when he realizes his presence no longer changes your emotional state. When his words don't stir anything, when his silence doesn't provoke anxiety, when his attention is no longer a priority. That realization doesn't explode, it sinks. And once it sinks, it lingers. True strength is not shown through abrupt endings, but through quiet detachment. It's choosing to grow rather than react, to move forward without announcement, to let silence speak what words no longer need to say. There is a quiet moment after disappointment when a woman starts to understand that reacting has never truly protected her heart. In that space, blocking him feels tempting because it promises instant relief. It feels like an action that draws a line, something visible and decisive. But relief and healing are not the same thing. Blocking may stop the noise, but it also stops the process that forces a man to sit with the consequences of his choices. Men are often most comfortable when situations are clearly defined. When you block him, you define the ending for him. You remove the gray area. He no longer has to wonder what you're feeling or where he stands. That clarity allows him to emotionally compartmentalize the situation and move on without fully examining what went wrong. The pain is quick, clean, and limited. What unsettles a man more deeply is emotional absence without finality. When communication lines remain open, but your energy is no longer invested, he feels something is off. He senses the shift. He doesn't get the reaction he expects, and that lack of response disrupts his emotional balance. Silence that isn't angry feels different. It feels intentional. It feels controlled. And control, especially when it's not in his hands, is uncomfortable. Men often measure their value by the impact they have on someone else's emotions. When you stop reacting, you remove that measure. He no longer knows if he matters in the way he once did. The messages that used to trigger immediate replies now sit unanswered or are met with calm neutrality. That change forces him to reflect, even if he doesn't want to. Blocking creates a wall. Emotional detachment creates space, and space invites thought. In that space, a man begins to replay moments, notice patterns, and recognize what he took for granted. He remembers the consistency, the support, the presence that once felt permanent. The absence of that emotional connection becomes heavier over time because it's not sudden. It's gradual. And gradual loss is harder to ignore. Remaining unblocked is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of confidence. It shows that you don't need dramatic gestures to feel secure. You are not trying to prove anything or provoke a reaction. You are simply choosing peace over chaos. That choice communicates maturity in a way that words never could. When you block someone, your action is still tied to them. It's still a response shaped by hurt. But when you choose calm distance, your focus shifts inward. You stop measuring your worth by how they respond. You stop waiting for acknowledgement or apology. That internal shift is what changes everything. A man feels the deepest sting not when he is rejected loudly, but when he realizes he has become irrelevant to your emotional world, when his presence no longer excites or disturbs you, when your life continues smoothly without his involvement. That realization doesn't hit all at once. It unfolds slowly, and with each passing day, it becomes harder to dismiss. Detachment is powerful because it is quiet. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't ask to be understood. It simply exists. And in that quiet, a man is left alone with the truth of what he lost, without distractions, without drama, and without the comfort of closure. There is a stage in emotional pain where a woman realizes that reacting has only kept her stuck in the same cycle. At first, blocking him feels like freedom. It feels like taking control back, like shutting the door before he can hurt you again. But what often goes unnoticed is that this kind of closure doesn't always bring peace. In many cases, it gives him an easy exit while you're still processing everything that happened. Men tend to handle endings differently. When something is clearly cut off, they adapt quickly. Blocking sends a clear signal that the connection is over, and that clarity allows him to mentally file the relationship away. He doesn't have to sit with uncertainty or question his actions for very long. The situation becomes simple, and simplicity is comfortable. What creates deeper impact is when the connection isn't loudly destroyed but quietly altered. When you remain calm, stop explaining yourself, and remove emotional investment, something changes in the dynamic. He feels the shift even if he can't name it. He notices that the tone is different, the urgency is gone, and the emotional pull no longer exists. That absence creates discomfort because it doesn't offer answers. A man often expects emotion as proof that he still matters. Angers, long messages, repeated conversations, all of these confirm that he still holds a place in your emotional world. When that confirmation disappears, his sense of importance is shaken. He starts questioning why your energy feels so distant and why his presence doesn't produce the same response. Not blocking is not about keeping hope alive. It's about emotional independence. You are no longer using communication to seek validation or closure. You are simply choosing not to invest where your energy is no longer valued. That choice reflects self-respect. And self-respect is something that is felt even without words. Men experience loss differently over time. At first, the silence may feel temporary to him. He assumes you'll come back to the conversation, that things will return to normal. But as time passes and nothing changes, the realization begins to settle. He understands that you didn't leave in anger. You left in clarity, and clarity is harder to argue with. Blocking is a reaction rooted in pain. Calm detachment is a decision rooted in strength. When you don't block him, you're not giving him access to your emotions. You're simply refusing to engage in a way that costs you your peace. That refusal is powerful because it doesn't ask for permission. A man feels the loss most deeply when he realizes he no longer has influence over your emotional state. When his words don't trigger explanations. When his absence doesn't provoke fear. When his presence no longer disrupts your inner balance. That loss feels different because it's not dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and undeniable. True detachment doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek revenge or recognition. It simply moves forward. And when someone realizes too late that the connection faded without noise, without conflict, without final words, the weight of that realization stays with them far longer than any argument ever could. There comes a point when reacting no longer feels empowering, only exhausting. In that space, the idea of blocking him feels like the strongest move you can make. It feels final, protective, and decisive. You believe it will show him that you're serious, that you won't tolerate disrespect, that you're done. But what often happens instead is that blocking removes the very thing that would have forced him to truly feel the loss. Men are generally more at ease with clear endings than unresolved distance. When you block him, you give him a clean line to stand behind. He can tell himself the situation is over, that there's nothing more he could have done, that the door was shut without discussion. That allows him to emotionally disengage faster, even if he doesn't admit it. The pain is short-lived because the story feels complete. What affects him far more deeply is when the door is technically still there, but the emotional connection is gone. When you don't argue, don't plead, don't demand answers, and don't disappear dramatically, he feels something unfamiliar. He feels the absence of your energy rather than the shock of your exit. And absence lingers longer than shock. A man often expects emotion as reassurance. Even frustration and anger tell him that he still occupies space in your mind. When that emotional feedback disappears, he starts to feel unsure. He wonders why you're no longer responding the way you used to, why your tone is calm, why there's no urgency. That uncertainty unsettles him because it removes his sense of control. Not blocking him doesn't mean you're waiting. It means you're no longer investing. There's a difference between availability and attachment. You can be reachable and still emotionally distant. That distance is what creates reflection. He begins to replay moments, recognize patterns, and realize that the version of you who once tried so hard is no longer present. Men often process loss slowly and visually. When he sees that you're stable, composed, and focused on your own life, it challenges the story he tells himself. He expected chaos. He expected breakdowns. He expected you to need him. Instead, he sees independence, and that contrast creates discomfort. Blocking is a reaction driven by pain. Emotional detachment is a choice driven by clarity. When you choose not to react, you stop centering him in your decisions. Your energy shifts back to you. You stop trying to be understood and start prioritizing your peace. That shift is subtle, but it's powerful. A man feels the deepest loss when he realizes his presence no longer affects your emotional state. When his messages don't excite or upset you. When his silence doesn't create anxiety. When his return wouldn't change your direction. That realization doesn't hit suddenly. It builds over time, and once it settles in, it's difficult to shake. True strength isn't shown through dramatic exits or loud boundaries. It's shown through restraint, composure, and self-respect. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop chasing clarity from someone who couldn't give it, the loss becomes real. Not because you announced it, but because you lived it. Expend 600 words, remove headings and conclusions. There is a certain kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come from dramatic gestures or emotional outbursts. It comes from restraint. When you're hurt, disappointed, or tired of repeating the same cycle, the instinct to block him feels natural. It feels like drawing a hard line, like finally choosing yourself. But what most people don't see is that this action often protects him more than it protects you. Men are conditioned to respond to clear signals. When you block him, you send a message that is easy to interpret. He knows where he stands. He knows the door is closed. That clarity allows him to shut down emotionally and move forward without having to sit in discomfort for very long. Even if he feels a sting, it's brief because the situation feels resolved. What creates deeper emotional impact is unresolved distance. When the connection is not aggressively severed, but quietly withdrawn, his mind has no solid ground to stand on. He can still reach out, still observe, still sense your presence, but the emotional response he once relied on is gone. That absence creates tension. He doesn't know if you're done healing, indifferent, or simply no longer interested, and that uncertainty stays with him. Men often associate their value with the effect they have on someone. When you reacted strongly before, even in pain, it confirmed that he mattered. Anger, tears, long explanations, all of it kept him emotionally relevant. When those reactions stop, something shifts inside him. He starts to question his place in your life. He notices that his words don't land the same way, that his silence doesn't provoke anxiety, that his presence no longer disrupts your peace. Not blocking him doesn't mean you're holding on. It means you've stopped engaging. There is power in being emotionally unreachable while remaining composed. You are no longer seeking answers, closure, or validation. You're no longer trying to make him understand how much he hurt you. That silence forces him to confront his own thoughts instead of responding to your emotions. Men process loss differently and often more slowly. At first, he may assume your distance is temporary. He may believe you'll come back to the conversation, that things will settle and return to what they were. But as time passes and nothing changes, the realization grows heavier. He understands that you didn't leave in anger. You left in acceptance. And acceptance is far more final than rage. Blocking is an emotional reaction. Detachment is an emotional decision. One is driven by pain, the other by clarity. When you choose detachment, you reclaim your energy. You stop centering your choices around him. Your focus shifts inward toward your own stability and growth. That shift changes everything, even if no words are spoken. A man feels the deepest loss when he realizes he no longer has access to your emotional world. When his attention doesn't excite you. When his absence doesn't hurt you. When his return wouldn't change your direction. That realization doesn't explode in a single moment. It settles slowly, quietly, and deeply. Silence, when it comes from strength rather than bitterness, carries weight. It doesn't beg to be understood. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply exists, and in that quiet space, a man is left alone with the truth of what he lost, without distraction, without drama, and without the comfort of a clean ending.